Hello, everyone. Today I wanted to go over an article that I found in Current Affairs. If you don't read it, it's a great publication. This article is entitled "The Cool Kids Philosopher." It's written by Nathan J. Robinson. Ben Shapiro's fans apparently think he's very smart. It is not clear why. It's easy to laugh, as some of us do, at the phrase conservative intellectual, when the most prominent public spokesmen for the right's ideas include Milo Yiannopoulos, Charles Murray, and Dinesh D'Souza. One might conclude that the movement does not have anything serious to offer beyond feminism is cancer, black people are dumb, and Democrats are Nazis. Those are, as I understand it, the central intellectual contributions of Yiannopoulos, Murray, and D'Souza, respectively. But according to the New York Times, it would be a mistake to write off conservative thought so hastily, for we would be overlooking one crucial figure, Ben Shapiro. Shapiro, we are told, is the cool kid's philosopher, dissecting arguments with a lawyer's skill and references to Aristotle. The Times quotes praise of Shapiro as a brilliant polemicist and principled gladiator, a quick-witted man who reads books and takes apart arguments in ways that make the conservative conclusion seem utterly logical. Shapiro is the destroyer of weak arguments. He has been called the voice of the conservative millennial movement. He is a genuine intellectual, a man who does not attack unfairly, stoke anger for the sake of it, or mischaracterize his opponent's positions. He is principled, he deplores Trump and cares about truth. Shapiro's personal mantra, facts don't care about your feelings, captures his approach. He's passionate, but he believes in following reason rather than emotion. Shapiro then represents the best in contemporary conservative thinking, and if the cool kids have a philosopher, it is worth examining his philosophy in some depth. I will confess I had not spent much time listening to or reading Ben Shapiro before reading about him in the New York Times. That might be a damning sign of my own closed-mindedness. Here I am, a person who considers himself intellectually serious, and I've written off the other side without even engaging with its strongest arguments. So I decided to spend a few wearying days trawling through the Shapiro oeuvre, listening to the speeches and radio shows and reading the columns and books. If Shapiro had arguments that destroyed and decimated the left, I wanted to make sure I heard them. I consider myself a bit of a leftist, and I like to know when I've been decimated. I'll admit that I was not immediately dazzled by the force of Shapiro's intellect. I started with his controversial recent Berkeley speech. Toward the beginning, he addressed Antifa protesters, whom he called communist pieces of garbage. You guys are so stupid, you can all go to hell, you pathetic, lying, stupid jackasses. According to the Times, there is a wide gulf between Trump/Yiannopoulos-style vulgar conservatism and Shapiro-style logical conservatism, but I just am not sure that I see in go to hell, you communist piece of garbage, the kind of polemical brilliance that Shapiro is reputed to demonstrate. The rest of the speech, when it got beyond making Botox jokes about Nancy Pelosi, was strong on insults. Pusillanimous cowards, hard-left morons, uncivilized barbarians, and lying on actual argumentation and substantive factual claims. Shapiro did say that the alt-right are full of bullshit and that the left overstates the threat posed by Shapiro's speeches, both true. The main thrust of the speech, though, is that America is the greatest country in the world, that there are no real injustices facing black people, women, and poor people, and that if you don't do well economically here, it's entirely your fault. As he says, this country is an amazing place full of opportunity. Nobody, by and large, cares enough about you to stop you from achieving your dreams. That includes you, people who are shouting out there in the audience. No one cares about you. Get over yourselves. I don't care about you. No one cares about you. That means in a free country, if you fail, it's probably your own fault. Now, this is probably a good place to pause because this is obviously just factually incorrect, and he's really mischaracterizing the counter-argument. He's saying nobody, by and large, cares enough about you to stop you from achieving your dreams. But that's not the argument. The argument is not that there are people who are investing so much time and energy to keep poor people down or to keep people of color down. That's not the argument. And I think it's very easy to see just how little effort needs to be undertaken to stop someone from achieving their dreams. I mean, for example, rejecting a job application because somebody's name sounds like an African American name. That doesn't. You don't have to care about a person to stop them from achieving their dreams. You just reject the job application. It doesn't take any effort. And to say that if you don't do well economically here, it's entirely your fault. I mean, that's obviously not the case. I mean, the idea that this is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps argument that the right always uses, and it's ridiculous, really. I mean, he's not factoring in generational wealth. He's not. I mean, if your parents don't have enough money to send you to college, then you won't be able to get a good job because you can't go to college, and you can't go to college because you don't have a job that's going to make enough money to get there. And so it's just a cycle of poverty that continues generation after generation. It's not, there is no level playing field in the United States, okay? If your parents are rich, you're going to be fine. If they're not, well, you're probably not going to be. That's not your fault. Shapiro scoffs at all claims that racism is a serious problem facing black people. This is in part because I wasn't an adult when Jim Crow was in place, and I would bet you money that the people in this room haven't acted in a racist manner, that they haven't held slaves or voted for Jim Crow. Well, I would actually bet money that some of those people in that room have acted in a racist manner. And they actually have also probably voted for Jim Crow because they probably vote for Republicans, and Republicans are currently in the process of rolling back the Voting Rights Act. I mean, Republicans are currently in the process of making sure that black people can't vote, from closing down polling stations in African-American neighborhoods to just scrubbing names off of ballots. I mean, this is what the Republicans are doing. And that's, you could say that's Jim Crow. So yeah, most of the people in the room probably have voted for Jim Crow. But anyways, he says the idea that black people's disproportionate poverty has anything to do with racism is just not true, and tosses out a few points to prove that the importance of race is overstated. First, Asian Americans are wealthier than white people, which would be impossible if racism determined economic outcomes. Shapiro doesn't mention that the vast majority of Asian American adults are immigrants, and they are disproportionately from the wealthier and more highly educated segments of their own countries. Second, he says people of any race who work full-time, are married, and have high school diplomas tend not to be poor, meaning that poverty is a function of one's choice not to do these things. In fact, this theory, widely cited by conservatives, turns out to be vacuous. Of course, people who have full-time jobs usually aren't in poverty. The problem is that black people disproportionately can't get jobs. Next, Shapiro says that because black married couples have a lower poverty rate than white single mothers, life decisions are what creates poverty. Actually, even when two black people pool their wealth in a marriage, the median white single parent has 2.2 times more wealth than the median black two-parent household. Finally, Shapiro says that the disproportionately black population in America's prisons says nothing about racism because black people simply commit more crimes. And if you don't commit a crime, you're not going to be arrested for it because the police are not going around arresting black people for the fun of it. I have some black men in Louisiana I'd like Shapiro to meet so that he can explain his theory that people don't get arrested for crimes they haven't committed. But I'd also like to hear him explain why black men receive 20% longer sentences for the same crime as white men with similar backgrounds. I mean, Nathan Robinson in this article is taking apart these arguments pretty well, but there's also, he's linking a lot of things as well. So I would advise you to actually check out this article, maybe look at some of these external links, because he's probably citing studies and research articles that are actually debunking what Shapiro is saying. But I would just like to say the idea that black people don't get arrested for crimes they don't commit is obviously false. I mean, there are studies of people who were sentenced to death before the advent of forensic science and DNA evidence, and they went back and checked the DNA evidence once that technology was around, and they found that black people were disproportionately sentenced to death for crimes that they didn't commit. So Shapiro just spits out, just says statements as if they're facts, even if they're completely false. Regardless, what dispirited me about Shapiro's approach is that he's clearly not actually very interested in facts at all. The role that race plays in American life is a serious sociological question, one that isn't answered easily. But Shapiro plucks only the statistics that suggest race doesn't matter and pretends that the statistics that suggest it does matter don't exist. Nobody can trust him, because if he comes across a finding showing that incarceration rates more closely follow crime rates than racial demographics, you can bet it will appear in his next speech. If someone shows that a white man with a criminal record is far more likely to receive a job callback than a black man without a criminal record, you'll never hear it mentioned. It would be perfectly reasonable for Shapiro to critique these findings. Sociologists critique each other all the time. Instead, he selects only the parts of reality that please him. Just look at his reply when he was asked about the black-white wealth gap. It has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. That's a strange thing to say, because the wealth gap has existed continuously since the time of slavery. Average black net worth has always been lower than white net worth, and there are massive structural obstacles to the black accumulation of wealth well into the 20th century, as we can see in Ta-Nehisi Coates' writings on the lasting impact of housing policy. Family wealth is passed down intergenerationally, and so it's hard to conclude that the fact that the average white family has $13 of wealth for every $1 of wealth held by a black family is the sole result of spontaneous contemporary black cultural choices, with no historical component whatsoever. The impact of human decisions on outcomes and the factors that shape the available range of choices are difficult topics in social science with no easy answers. But one thing we do know is that since black people were enslaved for 246 years and free for 152, and Jim Crow was in operation during the time of people who were still alive, thereby being a core determinant of both their life outcomes and the capital that they were able to pass on to their own children, anyone who says culture is everything and race is irrelevant is not actually seriously interested in trying to figure out how the world works. You're investigating Shapiro's works, then. The first sign that he might not be a philosopher was that he didn't seem especially interested in the central task of philosophy, namely the critical scrutiny of your own beliefs. Shapiro's worldview is fixed and immovable. Watch the video of his answer on the racial wealth gap. When his black co-panelists laugh at his answer about culture, he does not think to himself, perhaps they know something I don't know about what it is like to be black. He thinks they must be irrational and in need of my wisdom. He doesn't listen to anyone, he just confronts them. My initial impressions were also soured by Shapiro's casual bigotry. That may not be the wisest observation to lead with. I'm sure Shapiro would be very pleased with himself to hear me call him a racist, though Shapiro always looks somewhat pleased with himself. Nothing could better prove his point. The left has no arguments, so they resort to calling people they dislike racists, and since he explicitly says that he isn't a racist, what am I doing if not using the classic left-wing bullying tactic of dismissing your opponent as a nasty, bigoted individual? But, well, I don't know what else to call a statement like this. Israelis like to build. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. Shapiro followed it with the hashtag settlements rock. And here, just in case, here's the actual tweet from Ben Shapiro. So there's the evidence. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in sewage. Perhaps I'm crazy. Perhaps there's a definition of the word racism that wouldn't include a statement like that. But since the statements black people are violent and want to live in sewage, or Jews are violent and want to live in sewage, would both sound somewhat racist, I don't see how the conclusion can be avoided. What do you call a crass, pejorative generalization about an entire ethnic group? I know one word, but I'm open to others. By the way, it's amusing that Shapiro can see Gazan children swimming in sewage and think, wow, Arabs must just really have a thing for sewage, a train of reasoning roughly akin to, wow, Haitians must really love dying in earthquakes, since a lot of them seem to have done it. Though I'm reliably informed that Shapiro is a master of logic, so I'm sure there is more to this than mere simple-minded prejudice. I mean, this is actually kind of amazing. I mean, there's a reason that the people in Gaza, or some of them at least, are living in open sewage, and it's because, ironically, the Israelis have bombed their housing. The Israelis have incessantly bombed Gaza and destroyed buildings, which is maybe why some children in Gaza are living in open sewage. So, I mean, what a stupid generalization. It makes absolutely no sense. I mean, if you were to just look at the tons of bombs that Israel has dropped on Gaza and compare that to the amount of bombs that have been dropped by Palestinians, I mean, it wouldn't even be close. But that doesn't mean we can make a generalization about Israelis either. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Shapiro's thoughts about Arabs are all along similar lines. Usually conservatives are careful to draw a distinction. They're not condemning an ethnicity, but rather adherence to an ideology, namely Islamism. Not so with Shapiro. For him, the problem is not Islamism or even Islam writ large. It's Arabs. The Arab-Israeli conflict may be accurately described as a war between darkness and light. Those who argue against Israeli settlements, outposts of light in a dark territory, argue for the continued victory of night. Arabs value murder, while Israelis value life, and where light fails, darkness engulfs. Arabs are therefore as an undifferentiated unit a people of darkness. Palestinian Arabs are the worst of all. They are a population rotten to the core. Palestinian Arabs mostly fought on their own terms as a people dedicated to an evil cause. The Arab-Palestinian populace, by and large, constitutes the most evil population on the face of the planet. Since they're rotten to the core, there's no such thing as good Arab. Your evil is defined by your ethnicity, by being a member of the people of darkness and murder rather than the people of goodness and light. Again, it may just be my failure to understand facts and logic, but I'm having trouble understanding how population-level generalizations about the moral characteristics of particular ethnic groups can be anything other than bigotry. I mean, once again, this is just ridiculous. Arabs value murder while Israelis value life. That doesn't make any sense. But okay. And here he's specifically arguing for Israeli settlements, outposts of light in a dark territory. So stealing territory, that's a violation of international law, is the right thing to do. Okay. He has been clear about the implications of his views of Arabs as a dark and murderous people. He has said that secular Zionism, which requires the Arab citizens of Israel to be guaranteed equal rights, has always provided the seeds of Israel's destruction. Instead, God's roadmap requires the Jews to kill those who seek to kill them. Since Arabs universally value murder, I can't see how this is anything other than a philosophical justification of genocide. Shapiro has said that Arab nefariousness could be stopped without resorting to genocide, and is offended by anyone who tries to invoke the Jew word to describe its beliefs. But since he has said, 1, that Arabs are inherently murderous and bent on destroying Israel, and 2, God permits Jews to kill those who seek to kill them, it's hard to see how he could disagree with anyone who did advocate genocide, except on pragmatic grounds. Another point, does Shapiro believe in theocracy? I mean, he's saying Israel should follow this policy because of God, and he's against secular Zionism. So he wants a theocracy, which is interesting because the right claims they're against theocracies, or at least they're against ISIS, which wants to create an Islamic theocracy. That's what they claim they're against. But we all know what they're in favor of. Shapiro once explained his actual preferred solution to the problem of the dark Arab hordes, mass expulsion. As he said, bulldozing Palestinian houses and subjecting them to curfews are insufficient half measures. The only solution is to drive every last one of them forcibly from their homes and take their land, which is ethnic cleansing. The Arab enmity for Jews in the state of Israel allows for no peace process. The time for half measures has passed. Bulldozing houses of homicide bombers is useless. Instituting ongoing curfews in Arab-populated cities is useless. Some have rightly suggested that Israel be allowed to decapitate the terrorist leadership of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is not even a terrorist group. Hamas is, but not the Palestinian. What? Okay, but this too is only a half measure. The ideology of the Palestinian population is indistinguishable from that of the terrorist leadership. Half measures merely postpone our realization that the Arabs dream of Israel's destruction. Without drastic measures, the Arab dream will come true. If you believe that the Jewish state has a right to exist, then you must allow Israel to transfer the Palestinians and the Israeli Arabs from Judea, Samaria, Gaza, and Israel proper. It's an ugly solution, but it is the only solution. It's time to stop being squeamish. Odd that the NYT didn't choose to quote this passage in its profile. Every last Arab, even those who are Israeli citizens, must be deported, Shapiro said, because their ethnicity means that they harbor a murderous Arab dream. But to anyone who thinks this sounds like the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing, he has a firm response. It's not genocide, it's transfer. It's not Hitler, it's Churchill. It's actually very interesting that he's referring to Churchill positively, the guy who is quoted as saying, I am in favor of using poison gas against uncivilized tribes, which means, all those inferior races and all the places we're colonizing. Shapiro's referring to the Allied expulsion of German speakers from Polish territory immediately after World War II, in which anywhere from 3.5 to 9 million Germans were forcibly expelled from the new Polish territory and relocated in Germany. Shapiro favorably quotes Churchill's desire that there will be no mixture of populations to cause endless trouble. A clean sweep will be made. There's only one problem with the precedent cited by Shapiro. It is actually a forgotten historic atrocity, which is characterized by mass rape, torture, and murder, and left at least 400,000 people dead. Germans were interned in concentration camps and endured horrific journeys in which pregnant women froze to death. As Tara Zahra explains in a review of R.M. Douglas's Orderly and Humane, the expulsion of the Germans after the Second World War. After the Nazi defeat, the Volksdeutsch fled or were expelled to the west and were stripped of their citizenship, homes, and property in the largest forced population transfer and perhaps the greatest single movement of peoples in human history. Douglas amply demonstrates that these population transfers, which were to be carried out in an orderly and humane manner according to the language of the Allies' 1945 Potsdam Agreement, counted as neither. Instead, they were nothing less than a massive state-sponsored carnival of violence, resulting in a death toll that on the most conservative estimates must have reached 6 figures. Ironically, then, the post-war population transfers completed a process of segregation and ethnic cleansing that Hitler himself had begun. Interned women throughout Czechoslovakia and Poland were subject to rampant sexual abuse, rape, and torture. Germans were also forced to wear armbands or patches marked with the letter N for Nemec German, collective payback for the humiliation that the Nazis had inflicted on populations in the East. When they were finally transported west, the expellees traveled by cattle cars, sometimes going with barely any food or water for up to 2 weeks. One victim recalled that each morning 1 or more dead bodies greeted us. They just had to be abandoned on the embankments. Douglas concludes by calling the expulsions a tragic, unnecessary, and we must resolve never to be repeated episode in Europe's and the world's recent history. And this is what Shapiro is citing should be done to the Palestinians. This is the model that Shapiro believes should be applied to the murderous Arabs. Perhaps Israel could even have them wear patches with little A's on them, but that might seem a little racist, and Shapiro is firmly against racism. Shapiro has since suggested that his position on ethnic cleansing has evolved without admitting that he ever endorsed it, in part because large-scale population transfer is simply impractical. His position on the inherent evil of Palestinians, however, does not appear to have softened. As I say, I realize I'm playing right into Shapiro's hands by invoking the R word to describe his beliefs. His belief that Arabs are bomb-throwing sewage dwellers who deserve to be ethnically cleansed. But I happen to think Shapiro is a bit inconsistent on this. His standard of evidence for what constitutes ethnic prejudice seems to vary based on who the target is. When it came to George Zimmerman, Shapiro concluded that there's no evidence of Zimmerman's racism. Bear in mind that Zimmerman approached a stranger because they had a Confederate flag tattoo so he could brag about killing Trayvon Martin, got thrown out of a bar for calling someone a N-word lover, ranted about his girlfriend sleeping with a dirty Muslim, tweeted that the lives of black slime don't matter, labeled Barack Obama an ignorant baboon, posted memes comparing Michelle Obama to Chewbacca, and literally had a Confederate flag profile picture and sold paintings he did of said flag. Oh, and he also murdered an unarmed black teenager and proudly posted a photo of the boy's corpse on Twitter, but Shapiro has made it clear that he believes Trayvon Martin deserved to die. We might as well take a closer look at this. Trayvon Martin would have turned 21 today if he hadn't taken a man's head and beaten it on the pavement before being shot. That's an interesting take. From that, we might conclude that Shapiro has an extremely high threshold for evidence he will consider sufficient to deem someone a bigot, but it doesn't apply universally. Shapiro seems rather quick to accuse his opponents of anti-Semitic prejudice. That could be because they have described him as a neoconservative, which Shapiro considers an anti-Semitic slur. That's interesting. We should look at this. I know I'm Jewish, neocon, but I still think falsely blaming somebody for rape is more deranged than quoting your book, Lena Dunham. Okay, this is getting into something more specific, but he thinks that, I guess Lena Dunham calling him a neoconservative is her trying to say that he's using them interchangeably, like they're what? Okay. Or they could, like the Nazis at PETA, have diminished the relative value of Jewish lives by elevating the importance of animal lives. But nobody is quite as bad as Barack Obama, who Shapiro believes harbors a deep hatred of Jews, as President Obama was a philosophical fascist whose anti-Semitism was clear-cut. To support the fascism charge, Shapiro cites evidence like Obama's dictatorial demands, "I want a jobs bill on my desk without delay," the scornful looks and high-handed put-downs directed at his political opponents, and the arrogant chin-up head tilt he uses when waiting for applause. Shapiro says that Obama's vision for America is totalitarian, citing Obama's hope that the American people should have a government that matches their decency, that embodies their strength. Oh my god, this guy's an idiot. Alright, well, we may disagree over whether pressuring Congress to pass a jobs bill makes you literally Mussolini, but Shapiro says the anti-Semitism part is clear-cut. Why? Well, the first piece of evidence is that when the Israeli military stormed an aid flotilla bound for Gaza, killing 9 activists, the Obama administration soon released a statement saying that the United States deeply regrets the loss of life and injuries sustained. How else are we to interpret this lightning-fast knee-jerk anti-Israel response except as evidence of anti-Semitism, Shapiro asks, but perhaps you're not convinced. Well, Shapiro has more. In 2009, Rahm Emanuel went to speak at AIPAC and told the audience that U.S. efforts to thwart Iran's nuclear program would be conditional on successful resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict. This, Shapiro said, showed that Obama harbored a deep animus against Jews because he holds Israel to a higher standard than he holds anyone else. And while it may have turned out that Rahm Emanuel never actually said anything like this, leading at least one other columnist to issue a correction, Shapiro stood firm. Not only did he not amend the story, but later called Emanuel, who held Israeli citizenship for nearly 2 decades, whose middle name is literally Israel, and who even Jeffrey Goldberg thought made the idea of Obama being anti-Israel seem a bit ridiculous, a capo, i.e. a Jew who does the Nazis' bidding. Shapiro said that any Jewish person who voted for Obama was not really a Jew at all, but a Jew in name only, serving an enemy of the Jewish people. They may eat bagels and lox, but by supporting an openly anti-Semitic administration, they are disgusting and it degrades and twisted and evil, self-hating Jews who enjoy matzo ball soup and emerge from a Jewish uterus, but nevertheless choose to undermine the Israeli government, don't care a whit about Judaism, and in fact hold anti-Semitic views. Those may be snippet-length quotes, but go and read the columns if you suspect me of excising context or nuance. Which is why I say you should really look at some of these links. Some of them are directly leading to Ben Shapiro's articles. You must forgive me then for being somewhat confused by Shapiro's conception of prejudice, which includes people who say these deaths are regrettable, but excludes those who use the N-word and shoot black children in the face. But I realize I'm missing the meat of the Shapiro philosophy. Never mind Shapiro the ethnic cleanser, what about Shapiro the destroyer of weak arguments? Shapiro has built his reputation on his formidable ability to dismantle liberal orthodoxies, his dazzling use of logic to expose leftists as vacuous bullies who must stifle conservative speech because they cannot actually refute or debunk it. I'd like then to closely examine how Shapiro destroys a liberal argument in order to see his famous method at work. That's like how Shapiro debunks transgenderism when a student questioned or confronted Shapiro's belief that transgender women should not be considered women. Here's the argument he gave in defense of the position. You're not a man if you think you're a man. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, we call it gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex or gender is malleable is not true. I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I'm saying that you're not the sex which you claim to be. If you're going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are. Here's the problem. I'm saying that you're not the sex which you claim to be, but they're not saying that they're a different sex. It's literally called transgender for a reason. They're transgender. We're not talking about biological sex, okay? You don't have to modify basic biology. There's no need for that. What? When the questioner replied to suggest that transgender people just wanted to fit in, Shapiro hit her with a burst of stone-cold logic. After asking her how old she was, he asked her why she wasn't a different age. Answer, because age is a fact, not a choice. Then he asked her why she didn't just change her species. Shapiro, if I call you a moose, are you suddenly a moose? If I redefine our terms, young woman, that's a completely different thing. Shapiro, yes, that's right. Men and women, they're a completely different thing. This is true. Have you ever met a man or a woman that are completely different? Shapiro's position on transgender people is very simple. He rejects the pseudo-scientific nonsense that a man can magically turn into a woman because there's no different than thinking an undergraduate can turn into a moose. Shapiro says that individuals believe they are a different sex than that of their biology or psychologically ill, self-evidently so, and has compared the idea of being transgender to a schizophrenic grandfather who thought the curtains were speaking to him. But for a man who loves logical argumentation and would never mischaracterize his opponent's positions, Shapiro doesn't actually seem to grasp what the left argument about gender actually is, or what it is he's actually supposed to be disproving. Now, Nathan Robinson now goes and says, essentially the argument he lays out is that, well, Shapiro is using sex and gender as synonymous, and they're obviously not. And he uses this example here. And you should actually read this entire article. It's really well, but I'm just skipping over it because this is getting a little long. Here's something that's kind of related. At every turn, Shapiro shows that he simply wants to make his questioners look foolish rather than present the facts fairly. Just look at his discussion of suicide and bullying. The idea behind the transgender civil rights movement is that all of their problems would go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim membership. Once again, same problem here. That's nonsense. The transgender suicide rate is 40%. According to the Anderson School at UCLA, it makes virtually no difference statistically as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not. It has nothing to do with how society treats you. The normal suicide rate across the US is 4%. Suicide rate in the transgender community is 40%. The idea that 36% more transgender people are committing suicide is ridiculous. Note, Shapiro has misconstrued the statistic on suicide attempts as a statistic on successful suicide. It's not true. It's not backed by any science that anyone can cite. It's pure conjecture. It's not even true that bullying causes suicide. There's no evidence whatsoever that the suicide rate in the transgender community would go down in any marked way if people just started pretending that men were women and women were men. I can't find a study from the Anderson School about transgender suicide. The one UCLA study I can find on the subject, the one I think he must be referring to, directly contradicts Shapiro's contention, concluding that a higher than average prevalence of lifetime suicide attempts was consistently found among NTDS respondents who reported that they had been harassed, bullied, or assaulted in school by their students and or teachers due to anti-transgender bias, and the prevalence of suicide attempts was elevated among respondents who reported experiencing rejection, disruption, or abuse by family members or close friends because of anti-transgender bias. Another study found that social support reduced transphobia, and having any personal identification documents changed to an appropriate sex designation were associated with large relative and absolute reductions in suicide risk. So when Shapiro says that there's no evidence whatsoever and it's not backed by any science, it's actually backed by the exact study he has just cited. That study also demonstrates why another Shapiro talking about that transgender suicides can't be caused by prejudice because Black people have low suicide rates is false. A crucial determinant of suicide likelihood is people's level of family support, and if Black people have strong support networks, similar levels of discrimination could lead to differing levels of suicide. For a man who cares about facts rather than feelings, Shapiro doesn't seem to care very much about facts. There are plenty of minor mistakes that cast doubt on the Times code that Shapiro reads books. Some are just the little slip-ups that come from careless citing, e.g. the U.S. abolished slavery in 1862. Atheistic philosopher Gilbert Pyle, sick. Others are suspicious, unsourced generalizations, e.g. walk into virtually any emergency room in California and illegal immigrants are the bulk of the population. But there are also major embarrassing bloomers, like Shapiro promoting the false rumor that Chuck Hagel received a donation from a group called Friends of Hamas. A New York Daily News reporter had made up the group's name as something so ludicrously over the top that nobody could possibly believe it. But Shapiro, credulous enough to think the organization could exist, and published an article demanding answers. When it was pointed out that there was no such group, Shapiro did not retract the story. Instead, he doubled down, insisting that because he reported that sources said there was a Friends of Hamas, and the sources did say that his reporting was sound. No, this is not how journalism works. No, not at all. There are plenty of other points at which Shapiro has showed that his command of logic may not be terribly strong. He loves facts, but will make statements like monitoring mosques is the simplest and most effective way of preventing terrorist attacks, and cite simple common sense as a source. He will look back fondly on the era of the Hays Code, in which movies that did not portray correct moral messages were censored, and state that it is no coincidence that many great films were made during this time. So not to introduce Shapiro to the idea that just because two things occurred at the same time does not mean that one of them was responsible for the other. And this link literally goes to the Wikipedia page for correlation does not imply causation. Also, Ben Shapiro is the free speech warrior, isn't he? He's against SJWs because they don't want him to speak at college campuses, and he's in favor of the Hays Code. He's in favor of censoring movies. Okay then. The ACLU's attempt to bring Abu Ghraib photos to light was designed as a direct attack on American soldiers abroad. Again, there's no argument here, he just says it. So being against torture by the United States and other human rights abuses means you're directly attacking American soldiers abroad. I assume physically is what he means by that. Hip-hop is not music. People only say it is because of cultural sensitivity, and it is the product of a disgusting culture. Again, one presumes these are just facts, not feelings. No, he didn't like Hamilton either, and spent part of a radio show playing Hamilton and West Side Story side by side. Like a cool kid in order to show that Hamilton has forced rhymes that aren't actually rhymes. And has no harmony, no melody, just rhythm, and this is my problem with rap generally. The Supreme Court's decision to uphold the Affordable Care Act was literally worse than Plessy versus Ferguson and the case that allowed mentally ill people to be sterilized. Shapiro believes the decision said that the federal government can force you to do anything because it can tax non-behavior, though since there is zero practical difference between providing a tax penalty for not doing something and a tax credit for doing something, this framework means every tax credit is a form of totalitarianism. Some of his arguments just make no damn sense at all. When is his contention that capitalism doesn't mean the greedy pursuit of self-interest? Corporatism does, while capitalism just means, I'm not sure. Try to reconcile his statement that capitalism isn't about economic self-interest with the statement that capitalism values people by their economic usefulness. Or his case that socialism is racism because in capitalism people are valued entirely in accordance with their market worth, irrespective of race. Shapiro's argued that shop owners who discriminate among customers would go out of business, which might be true if there wasn't a huge racial wealth gap and no consumers ever preferred to patronize racially segregated establishments. Mocked T.I. for naming his children Sonique and Deja. It's not clear what the rational basis for disliking black names is. When Barack Obama said that we need to keep changing the attitude that punishes women for their sexuality and rewards men for theirs, Shapiro wondered why Obama thought anyone should be rewarded for their sexuality. I'm curious how Shapiro did on the logical reasoning section of his LSAT if he believes don't punish X or reward Y means reward X and or Y. He thinks that criticisms of those who seem to love wars but decline to fight them are explicitly rejecting the Constitution itself, which provides that civilians control the military. Go ahead and try and figure out the reasoning on that one. He was strongly against a federal ban on using cell phones while driving because it would take away drivers' freedom of choice. He believes it is morally tragic that we no longer use the police to stop people from making and watching pornography because it follows the silly philosophy that as long as what I do doesn't harm you personally, I have a right to do it. Shapiro said that if pornography is legal, there would be no logical reason not to legalize the murder of homeless people without addressing the potential meaningful distinctions between having sex and killing a person in cold blood. Shapiro may be the cool kid's philosopher, but on the rare occasions when he actually dips his toe into metaphysics, the results are catastrophic. He argues that atheism is incompatible with the idea of free will because religious people believe that free will is granted by God. My beliefs say that your beliefs can't be true, therefore they can't be true, is known as assuming the conclusion. But separate from Shapiro's shaky ability to tell the truth and understand simple reasoning, I find his actual moral values somewhat horrifying. These can't be debunked or disproven, of course, they're matters of different instinct, but I don't share Shapiro's religiously derived conviction that any moral system condoning homosexuality will lead to fluid, careless amalgam of values that will cause America to suffer the fate of ancient Rome, nor do I see any facts to support this hypothesis. I'm especially troubled by Shapiro's stance on war. In defending the invasion of Iraq, Shapiro specifically praised imperialism, saying that for the United States, empire isn't a choice, it's a duty. Never mind weapons of mass destruction, maintaining U.S. global power is an end in itself, even if 500,000 Iraqis had to lose their lives as a result. Shapiro even endorsed invading countries that do not pose any immediate threat, suggesting that almost any Muslim nation could legitimately be attacked if doing so serve the interests of our global empire. Did Iraq pose an immediate threat to our nation? Perhaps not, but toppling Saddam Hussein and democratizing Iraq prevent his future ascendance and end his material support for future threats globally. The same principle holds true for Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, and others. Preemption is the chief weapon of a global empire. No one said empire was easy, but it is right and good both for Americans and for the world. We could call this the better kill everyone just in case doctrine. So here he's in favor of preemption, which doesn't really make sense because we could assume that he's against Pearl Harbor, right? And that's literally just the case of preemption. I mean, you can make the exact same argument. And actually, he wouldn't be against Japan having a global empire either, because he's in favor of global empire, and he's in favor of imperialism. He literally says empire is right and good, right here. So what is he in favor of Pearl Harbor? It's a preemptive strike by a global empire in order to further their imperialism. I mean, this is ridiculous, really. What's more, Shapiro doesn't believe that criticizing the American government during a time of war ought to be legal at all. The champion of free speech has literally called free instating sedition laws. When Al Gore told a Muslim audience that he believed the United States' indiscriminate random government detention practices after 9/11 were terrible and abusive, Shapiro called the statements treasonable, seditious, and outrageous, and demanded that the law respond. At some point, opposition must be considered disloyal. At some point, the American people must say enough. At some point, Republicans and Congress must stop delicately tiptoeing with regards to sedition and must pass legislation to prosecute such sedition. Under the Espionage Act of 1917, opponents of World War I were routinely prosecuted, and the Supreme Court routinely upheld their convictions during World War II. President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the internment of hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans, as well as allowing the prosecution and or deportation of those who opposed the war. This is not to argue that every measure taken by the government to prosecute opponents of American wars is just or right or constitutional. Some restrictions, however, are just and right and constitutional and necessary. No war can be won when members of disloyal opposition are given free rein, sick to undermine it. I mean, this is the champion of free speech himself, opposing free speech. And I like how he cites things that happened in the past in which the policy that he is currently supporting was actually undertaken, and uses that as an argument as to why we need to follow that policy, like he did before with Churchill and ethnic cleansing. And now he's saying that rounding up Japanese Americans because they're Japanese American and putting them in internment camps and taking away all their property and confiscating it, just because that happened in the past, that means that he's right. And he's putting it in a positive light, as if this was a good thing, and cracking down on free speech. Okay. The Wilson administration crackdown on critics of the war and the imprisoning of dissidents were actually a low point in the history of American liberty, and the legal decisions upholding these acts are now discredited. But Shapiro sees this, along with the even more disturbing mass internment of Japanese Americans, as a model for eliminating critics of America's wars. Although elsewhere, Shapiro has called the Supreme Court's decision upholding Japanese detention evil and disgusting. Consistency, as I've indicated before, is not his forte. Having surveyed Shapiro's work and pointed out the various ways in which he is not terribly logical, not terribly consistent, not terribly well-informed, in addition to being not terribly humane, is sort of asking why so many people think of him as a principled and brilliant dismantler of arguments. The answer, it seems to me, is largely that Shapiro is a very confident person who speaks quickly. If he weren't either of these things, he wouldn't seem nearly as intelligent. Because he doesn't care about whether he's right, but about whether he destroys you. He uses a few effective lawyerly tricks, insist that there's no evidence whatsoever, something is true, demand the other side produce such evidence, and when they stammer for 2 seconds, quickly interrupt with, see what did I tell you, no evidence. Or just pluck some random numbers for his study, even if they're totally false or misleading, e.g. 40% of transgender people commit suicide and the risk doesn't go down if they're treated better, which is nonsense but sounded good. Cross-examine people with aggressive questions that confuse them. Are you a moose? I said, are you a moose? No, I didn't think so. I rest my case. Use shifting burdens of proof, demand a wealth of statistical evidence before you will admit that black people face any unique hardships. Respond to every criticism of the Israeli government, calling the speaker a proven and undeniable anti-Semite. Disregard all facts that contradict your case, but insist constantly that the other side despises fact and can't handle the truth. Call your opponents nasty, evil, brainless jackasses. All of these techniques work very well, and with them, you too can soon be owning and destroying your political opponents on camera. I'd probably lose a debate with Ben Shapiro quite badly as my instinct in public conversation is to try to listen to people. Let me tell you why Ben Shapiro actually aggravates me. It's not his voice or demeanor, though I understand why others find these characteristics grating, nor is it the way he inserts references to first-year law school doctrines, even when they aren't actually relevant. It is rather that Ben Shapiro is lying to his audience by telling them that he's just a person concerned with the truth, when the only thing he actually cares about is destroying the left. Facts don't care about your feelings is a fine mantra, albeit kind of a dickish one, but it's worthless if you're going to interpret every last fact in the way most favorable to your own preconceptions, if you're going to ignore evidence contrary to your position, and refuse to try to understand what your opponents actually believe. The New York Times actually quoted a sensible-sounding ex-Shapiro fan and said he realized over time that Shapiro was just concerned with convincing other people was right, rather than actually being right. Shapiro is annoying because it claims love speech and discourse to believe you should get to know people, get to know their views, discuss. But if you're an Arab, he's already convinced you're a secret anti-Semite. And if you're a poor black person, he doesn't need to know you to know that you're culturally dysfunctional. The encouraging news is that if Ben Shapiro is the sharpest thinker among millennial conservatives, millennial leftists don't have too much to worry about. You may feel as if Shapiro is a vaporizer of poor logic, Aristotle for a time. You may feel as if he's brutally torn apart every person who has crossed out in public, though has tried into his technique of speaking extremely quickly until they give up. You may feel that he's brilliant, thoughtful, and sincere, but before you treat these feelings real, remember that annoying little fact about facts. They don't really care how you feel. This is an amazing article by Nathan Robinson. Once again, all credit goes to Nathan Robinson for writing this article, for pulling everything together. And I'm obviously going to link the article in the description below. And I mean, he's really done a good job of curating all of these different ridiculous statements by Shapiro and dissecting them. And that's really what it comes down to. The only reason people think he's intelligent is because he sounds confident, he talks quickly, he uses weaselly, lawyerly techniques of debate, fallacies, and he's very condescending when he speaks, which Robinson doesn't mention, but I might as well add. Whenever he's in a debate, he's always extremely condescending to the person he's debating with. And when they say something, he'll like grin or smirk or just laugh. And to the audience, if two people are debating and one of them is laughing at what the other person is saying, you get the feeling that what the other person is saying must be ridiculous. If the other person thinks it's so ridiculous that they're laughing out loud at it. And when Shapiro talks and he's so condescending to the other person, you can't help but feel like the other person must be stupid. And that's really the only reason that Shapiro has an audience, the only reason people think that he's good at debating. And so, yeah, I don't know what more else there is to say. So thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you like this video, and I'll be continuing to make more videos like this. Thank you.